Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett. CBS News has confirmed President Biden is likely to announce a re-election bid not long after he delivers the State of the Union. The president is scheduled to make that address to Congress on February 7th. Senior White House advisors tell CBS News the president will not announce during that speech, of course not, but he will use that address to explain his short-term and long-term policy ambitions. Formal announcement for a re-election bid could come as early, we are told, as late February. Meanwhile, as you might remember, former President Trump announced his candidacy for another presidential term way back in November. Feels like forever ago. But Trump hasn't held any formal campaign events since then. He is set to hold his first next week in South Carolina. There are a number of Republicans who are considering a challenge to former President Trump. One of them is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has already earned a nickname of sorts from the former president, sanctimonious, and a few recent barbs. The 44-year-old Republican was reelected easily in November and sworn in for his second term earlier this month. For more on 2024, Jim DeFede joins us now. Jim is our CBS News Miami investigative reporter. Jim, always good to see you. What would you say is right now the political trajectory of Ron DeSantis?
Well, he's clearly on the upswing. I mean, he's everybody's favorite candidate on the Republican side other than Donald Trump. He has the coterie of billionaires who have pumped a lot of money into his campaign. He has more than $90 million still at his disposal, even after raising $200 million for his governor's race. He's the guy who everyone wants to default to. He's the person who people believe you get Trump without all the Trump baggage, as it were. And so right now, he's in a really good position, not eager to jump into a race that he doesn't need to since he's got high name recognition already.
And he has a legislative session to go through. And as I read it, Jim, a rather compliant, if not pliant, state legislature willing to do just about whatever the governor asks him to do. And on the other side of that, perhaps DeSantis will look more seriously at a bid.
Yes. I mean, one could even say a submissive legislature that has basically given the governor everything he wants whenever he wants it. It is, he's called special sessions and didn't even share with legislators what the bill would be, whether it was regarding Disney or other bills in terms of vanquishing his opponents. So he has the ability to scare and intimidate a lot of politicians, particularly on the Republican side here in Florida. Nobody is expecting Ron DeSantis to make any sort of announcement before the summer. The session runs basically from March till about, the end of April. So nobody's expecting an announcement before the end of session. What you will see in this legislative session, though, are many of the same culture war issues, many of the same national issues that he likes to stir the base up with. He will use the 2 months of the legislative session to really sort of stoke those things and get himself back on Fox News as regularly as he can.
Jim, in sports, it's always dangerous to build expectations entirely on potential that's on paper. And right now, that appears where Governor DeSantis is. Tremendous upside potential on paper. But he hasn't been tested nationally. He hasn't been tested in the kind of retail politics essential to claiming a nomination. And he hasn't tried to throw a punch at former President Trump. How do you evaluate all those potential weaknesses?
Well, let's take the last point first. There's no value in him taking a shot at President Trump right now, former President Trump, because he doesn't know what the future holds for former President Trump. As you noted, we were both there for the announcement in November, and the former president, has basically run a non-campaign in the months since. So there's no upside for him taking a shot at the Trump folks. Now, your other point, though, about him never actually taking a punch yet is absolutely true. Let's review the record. Governor DeSantis has won every election, whether it's a congressional race or the 2 races he's run for governor. He has a compliant, submissive legislature that gives him everything he wants. He has restructured the state Supreme Court so he doesn't have to worry about the same state Supreme Court, striking down any of his laws or rulings or actions. He has been able to sort of skate by with that air of hubris, as some Republicans like to point out, of somebody who's never taken a punch to the nose. And yet we've seen that even in the one debate he had with Charlie Crist, even though his own internal polling showed him up by 15, even as it ultimately was, 19 points, when Charlie Crist took a shot at him, he became rankled. He became a little uncomfortable. His neck started bobbing, and you could see the uncomfortable nature that he had on stage. What's that going to be like when he's going in Iowa or New Hampshire with 6, 7, 8 Republicans all taking shots at him? We remember what it was like for Marco Rubio, another Florida presidential hopeful who had a lot of promise, when Chris Christie laid into him. What happens when one of those guys, whether it's some other Republican candidate taking a shot at him? I think that's what's going to be the real test is can Ron DeSantis take a shot? Because he doesn't even interact with unfriendly media. He only goes on friendly media. So he doesn't do the back and forth, the give and take with reporters from CNN, CBS, NBC, any of the other outlets. He only goes on friendly news channels where he knows he'll get treated with kid gloves.
And Jim, a lot of people will roll their eyes when I ask this question of you because they don't really care, because they're not in the rooms, because they don't write the big checks. But there are people who do. There are big donors who expect a little bit of donor management. It's not a secret among political reporters that Governor DeSantis has a lot to learn or could acquire some skills in this donor maintenance world. Your thoughts?
Absolutely correct. You know, he's had a couple of thank you parties, ostensibly thank you parties, for some of his major donors in Miami and in Tallahassee before his inauguration. And, you know, the one in Miami, the reports out of it were quite striking. Like, he spent very little time. He did not do any glad handing, did not interact with people. It seems very uncomfortable. He's always had that reputation as being someone who is uncomfortable. You know, he tried a little bit more in Tallahassee, clearly showing that he had heard the criticisms. But even in other interactions you see with him, he is not someone, you know, I go back to an old expression. You know, there used to be in politics the saying that, you know, is this a candidate that I'd like to have a beer with? You know, Ron DeSantis is not a guy that you want to necessarily sit up and have a beer with. He's going to test whether or not that's important or not. Now, I will tell you, the most humanizing aspect of Ron DeSantis, the person who warms him up, who gives him that sort of like more of a aesthetic, is his wife, Casey DeSantis. There is no doubt in my mind the most critical piece for Ron DeSantis, if he chooses to run for president, will be his wife, Casey. And let's remember, she comes from a TV background. She was in TV news. I think that probably the person who is working with Ron DeSantis more than anyone in terms of making him better, in terms of how he presents himself, is his wife, Casey, because she did it for so long on TV.
Jim, I don't want to overlook what's happened in Florida. He won narrowly for election, and then, as you said, won by 19 points. And there are conversations going on in Democratic Party circles that Florida may be slipping through their fingers as a place that's actually competitive. You can't take DeSantis out of that if that's true. That means his political skills do matter, and they could have national implications.
Look, the red wave that was promised by the Republicans throughout the rest of the country did not materialize, except it did happen in Florida. Florida was a red wave. It turned Miami-Dade County for the first time in 20 years from blue county to a red county. It turned Palm Beach County into a red county. It weakened Broward County, the stalwart county of Democrats. So clearly, Ron DeSantis's message coming out of that election is, if you were disappointed, if you're a Republican in other parts of the country, and you were disappointed by the results of what happened out of Washington and the other candidates, the recipe can be found in Florida. That's his argument. I can take what I did here in Florida and replicate it across the country and taking back the White House. That will be his message. Now, whether or not that'll work, we'll have to wait and see, of course. But that's the main key for him is he came out of the 2022 elections probably stronger than any other person because of how well he did in Florida and how weak Republicans did everywhere else in the country.
When it comes to Florida politics, Jim DeFede knows what he's talking about. Jim, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Major.